App managers get it the worst. Ultimately, that app manager persona, which is the most important persona, usually in these organizations, because they're the ones that glue together the business and the technology, and they build the culture of the engineers under them. They're the ones that translate between everybody and help make good decisions and make the really important decisions. And they're the ones that are spread the most thin by all this nonsense. And I've got a quote that I have in these decks. Is like, I spend all my time dealing with spreadsheets and reacting to some fire drill from this compliance function or this audit review. It's chaotic and all consuming. I need a way to get ahead of it.
The audits get blank checks. You give an audit, you have an exam. They literally get a blank check that says, if they say jump, you say how high, and you do whatever they need to do, blow up everything that you're doing to get them what they need on time. It's a problem.
These things exist for a reason. It might be dysfunctional. It might not be. It might just be the way it is. If you are an app manager or even a senior leader in technology, your ability to influence that ecosystem is very limited. All right.
We are up. Episode 11.
11. It's amazing. We've actually done something for 11 weeks in a row. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, with delivering on a schedule. I
know.
We're not really used to that.
I know. It's like the plan. It's probably the most consistent plan we've had in a while here. So it's kind of cool though. But it's nice little milestone to get into in almost a teenager of a podcast. This is good. So today we wanted. There was something that happened over the weekend that we got into a bit of a conversation, and we said, hey, let's talk about this. There was this really cool, I don't know, for those of you that follow, like they're on Twitter, there's a handle there or an account there that's called like internal tech emails or something like that, where it's somebody that goes and is watching all the what's the discovery around lawsuits, right? That happen. And so they get these really fascinating emails that get leaked. You know, there's some cool ones from Steve Jobs back in the day and lots of, it's like one of my favorite accounts to follow. And they leaked over the weekend. I say leaked. They posted over the weekend this long email by Mark Zuckerberg. I want to say 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. And
no.
To his essentially leadership teams, Sheryl Sandberg and all those folks.
Yep. May of 2018.
Yeah. And so I just thought it was a fascinating thread, like of just thinking about big picture and strategy for a business. And there's a bunch of really interesting things in there. We'll link it in the show notes for those of you that are intrigued. And I sent it around to probably like a dozen people. I was like, this is so cool. But one of the key ideas in there that he talked about was this concept of a strategy tax. And in particular, he was talking about this sort of the conflict between Instagram, core Facebook product, and WhatsApp, and how like how the strategy between the three of them being ambiguous was causing a drag on the overall business. And I just thought the conversation was really, really interesting. But it triggered for us this conversation of, from where we came from, in the banking world, in the startup and tech world, this concept of like administrative tax, right? Like the administrative state that happens within these organizations. And, just wanted to spend some time discussing, that from our perspective and why it exists. What are some of the things you can do about it? What's the right way to sort of approach it? So I said, we'll kick it off. Like, what's the administrative tax mean to you, Jason? Like when I say that,
well, first off, I want to say, do not share beyond this group. The funniest thing on that was that the very first was do not share this email. And here it is in front of millions of people seeing this, but discovery is different, but it's just kind of a funny comment on there.
You shouldn't write anything that you're not comfortable with your mom seeing on the cover of the New York Times or something like that was the old rule. I mean, I think that's more true than ever. These things remind me of that too, right? Like especially email is extremely discoverable for lawsuits. I'm pretty sure Signal basically exists so people can get out of discovery and make sure that their stuff is never going to get subpoenaed or discovered. Although I think the trust in that might be diminishing as well. But that's a good call. Good call.
Well, there's a reason that some of the timeouts or the auto deleting of messages exist in some of these places is so that they can expire and they're not part of the permanent history of a company. And there's part of a reason that some of these requirements exist to purge your Slack messages, purge your Teams messages, purge your emails, because auto deleting is not part of the discovery process. But that, to your question,
real quick on that, like one of the things for me that was really fascinating is I'm sure I wonder if you had this experience too, but I'm not sure. It's like one of those moments where you're like, hey, you grew up when you realized, like you became an adult when you realized the lawyers are the ones, the lawyers are super intense about data retention policies, but they don't want them longer. They want them shorter. And that was the thing that kind of blew my mind. It's like, I thought the lawyers, I was like, no. I think it was at Passport, they're working with the general counsel there. He's like, no, can we crank that down? Because they wanted to make sure we were deleting evidence, call it evidence, but they wanted to make sure there wasn't stray evidence out there, that we had done something inadvertently inappropriate. And the more data you have available for discovery, the more trouble you might be in if somebody goes through it with a fine tooth comb. The lawyers are always pushing for shorter retention. And it was one of those moments where I just kind of like lost my innocence and I realized, oh, okay. Now I get it. That's why they want it shorter. So
kind of bridging the two conversations together, though, and that's part of a tax, though. That's part of a tax on an enterprise or an organization to have not only the controls in place to delete messages over time automatically. You have to have somebody to implement that. You have to have a team that manages the connection with the platform or the website or the app that's doing this. You've got to have the teams that are losing some information in those systems so that they're automatically deleted. So, but that's kind of an example of a strategy tax, because if you didn't have to do that, what else could you be doing with your time? And probably something more important than having emails and messages automatically delete.
Yeah, no, I think the way I think about kind of the administrative tax or the bureaucracy of it all, or I have all kinds of less than complimentary terms for it. I mean, it's one of those things that's really easy to get cynical about. It also, if you've been around and run organizations enough, you kind of start to see why these things happen. I mean, to be fair, like in 2025, there's a lot of macro level forces that are causing these things to happen within big Fortune 500 type companies. There was a big regulatory although that may be getting undone, but certainly over the last like 5 to 10 years, the regulatory, arm of the governments, Europe's gone completely bananas and the US government went a little crazy too, have gotten really intense, right? Especially in the financial services world. There's just so much that they were going with. We were inside banks and watching with the FRB, the amount of scrutiny that they ramped up and how specific they were getting about things around like technical architectures and incidents and things like that was shockingly, the acceleration was shocking. Not necessarily that they were asking for anything inappropriate, but just like it went from 10 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour in a matter of a couple of years in terms of the intensity of what they were driving.
I mean, I was on plenty of meetings where we were talking about those incoming or potential regulations, potential work, and the hundreds of hours that people are spending just planning out what are we going to do if this happens. It adds up to a significant measure over time. I mean, I've probably lost half a week just in a month over that.
Well, yeah, and that was, I mean, I think for you, I'm guessing based on the way you just said that, you're talking about like the California Privacy Act or something like that.
Well,
right?
There's the Privacy Act. There's GDPR. There's
all that stuff.
Open banking. There's the federal exams on some of these. And the exams alone put in. I can't even count the number of hours that we had to spend on some of those.
The exams in particular were brutal because not only would you have to put an enormous amount of time and effort into preparing for them, inevitably, having sat in a little bit of it myself, luckily I was never directly responsible for those, but having gotten a little bit of visibility into it, it kind of get the sense they want to create. Like if if they feel like you've answered all the questions up front, they're going to come up with new questions. So not only do they,
let's pull it apart a little bit though, because there's two parts of that. There's two parts of those. It's the federal is the exam. That's the official on the record. But then you've got your internal auditors who are even more intense in some levels. That what you're mentioning is more sounding like the audit, where they're you've got to, answer their question perfectly to what they want you to answer it way. And if you deviate from that even slightly, you've just opened up a whole new can of worms that you don't have to explain away.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll get to those ones, right? Like with the exams, the thing that I saw that was super disruptive, not only was there an enormous amount of prep, but then they would drop these additional requests on top of you in the room. And you'd have to turn that around in like 24 to 36 hours. Like it's some crazy thing. And they're like not trivial questions. Be like, well, what about this information? You're like, and you have to go blow up, 10 people's day at least to go and drive and figure out that answer. I mean, it's unbelievably disruptive and expensive. And it was fairly common. Right. I don't remember the exact schedule for those types of things, but to your point, it's not just the one, there's a bunch of different agencies. And then there's the internal stuff, which is the internal stuff is even worse. Cause there's this thing called the Cobra effect. Have you ever heard this story? Like, the Cobra effect is? So like, for those of you that haven't heard,
just assume that I do, but just assume that I don't.
So there's this story from like when the Brits were, kind of in the empire phase and they were running, what was Bombay at the time and different places in India. And they had this problem with Cobra, like snakes, like being everywhere, and they were biting people and killing people. And obviously that's no good. So whoever the guy in charge or the group of people in charge was like, well, okay, cool. We'll pay people to catch and kill the cobras for us. And, we'll give them $5 or whatever the equivalent was or whatever the number was back then. And what ended up happening was it worked at first, but then people just started breeding cobras and killing them and turning them in. And so you had this problem where, so the Cobra effect became this term of like perverse incentives, essentially, right? So if you have a bad incentive structure, then things compound worse and worse and worse, right? So you mentioned the auditors. I would also think about like when I was first coming up as a UI developer, I was working at Bank of America and we had this offshore QA team, right? Or they weren't all offshore, but a lot of them were. And it was a third party. It was like Accenture or somebody like that, right? And they were getting paid by the defect. Well, guess what happened, right? Mm-hmm. Like we got flooded with defects and 90% of them were nonsense, but we still had to spend time dispositioning them, right? Like we had to get in there and prove that it was nonsense or prove that it was a duplicate or whatever. So it cost us an enormous amount of time because they had the incentive to open more defects because I don't know if they were actually compensated, but
we actually had the same thing. Like we had, when we had some offshore QA, we were just flooded with defects. My job is clearly defined defects. So I'm just going to look for defects and log defects. And we had hundreds. We could never get through the entire backlog of them because they were, to your point, we had to disposition them. We had to look at them. We had to evaluate them. We had to try to reproduce them because it was nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, I remember you're right. It's a good point. Like, and the amount of time I could dedicate, I think at the time was like an hour a day to getting through those. I would never get through the backlog from the day before of just validating them and like usually disproving them and showing like this is not a defect or this is, in our case, a lot of it was opinions about how the software should work, right? Like it wasn't even, this isn't broken. It's like, oh, it should be like this. It's like, all right, well, you don't actually know what you're talking about, so go away. But yeah, no, it's that perverse incentive structure. But if you think about what happens in large organizations, right? Like that stuff, I will say my observation has been most big companies are not great at thinking about the incentive structures of their organizations. I think about individual incentive structures, but they don't necessarily think about the incentive structures of the organizations, right? So if you think about an audit function, right? The audit's function is to find problems, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's their incentive is to find problems. So to your point, you come into an audit, they're not trying to make sure, over enough iterations, an audit organization isn't trying to make sure the company's safe. They're trying to find problems.
Well, and they interpret the requirements in a way that the worst case scenario could fit finding a flaw, finding a defect. It doesn't matter if it's truly to the letter of the capital L law. It's depending on how they interpret the policy to be. And it's, you've got this telephone game that, well, this person said this, which said this, wrote it this way. And now hey, I'm just a messenger. I'm just interpreting it this way. And you have now failed. And so
audit drives me crazy, man. Oh.
Well, it's kind of to my earlier point here. It's also partly how you explain this. Cause I remember part of the audits that I was in is that you had to be careful of the verbiage used in these audits, because if you misspoke about any one step of it, then it got escalated, and then you had to spend 3 or 4 more meetings trying to explain how that first statement was actually, it was technically correct, but it wasn't to what the auditors wanted to hear. So yeah, I received some multiple feedbacks on that, and I had to get involved many times on these audits where, what are we really talking about here? This is the way all the other apps work in here, and you've interpreted it this way. So now, we've got to spend 3 more hours explaining it.
Yeah. So we're talking about about one situation that I think we both feel is slightly dysfunctional, but again, not necessarily those people's fault, just the way the system was sort of set up caused that. And
it's not the individual. It's just what you mentioned before. It's the incentives of that team is to find the flaw in the system.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and of course, it requires every bit of like maturity that I have to make it through those things without losing my mind, because like I can think of a couple of instances. One in particular, I think it was actually one of your applications. I wasn't directly involved, but I was kind of on the tertiary side. I was kind of on the perimeter of it, and they dinged you for your run book not being compliant. And I pulled it up and I looked at it. I was like, this is a great run book. Like, these people are ridiculous. They have no idea what they're talking about. Now, technically speaking, were you missing, to your point, the letter of the law of what they were talking about, and like that it should have this, and they didn't understand that it had been covered. And yet, so they dinged you anyways, and you just had to kind of rewrite it to match their structure a little better. It's like those types of things make me crazy, because actually the intent of the run book specification was better fulfilled than the letter. Mm-hmm. And yet they still kind of, they don't have the expertise. They're lawyers, it's just something I used to say.
But they shouldn't have to have that level of experience to say, do you match the requirements? And it diminishes things, and that even compounds the tax 2 or 3 fold, because now if the run book isn't as good because it meets the letter of the law, now you're spending more time to have to do incidents and triages or whatever you need to do to fix a problem if you do have an actual incident.
Well, and again, though, coming back to it, right? Like if you're the audit function in a Fortune 500 financial institution and you're not finding issues all the time, people are going to question you, right? And so it's like, that's a fundamental challenge that I think exists, because then you're going to have to prove that you're actually doing a good job. Now the audit needs an audit, and it's just like, oh my goodness. So like, and in our experience, like one of the things, and because specifically we're not just talking about general administration, we're talking about in the context of a technology organization or within a software engineering organization. And we literally have this it's like one of the prime slides in our kind of PowerPoints for DevGrid. It's like, app managers get it the worst. Like all this stuff is coming from everybody. And it's ultimately that app manager persona, which is the most important persona usually in these organizations, because they're the ones that glue together the business and the technology and kind of they build the culture of the engineers under them. And they're the ones that translate between everybody and help make good decisions and make the really important decisions. And they're the ones that are spread the most thin by all this nonsense, because ultimately it comes down from the top. And I've got a quote that I have in these decks is like, I spend all my time dealing with spreadsheets and reacting to some fire drill from this compliance function or this audit review. It's chaotic and all consuming. I need a way to get ahead of it. Right. Like,
and that's a friend of ours
that's dealing with that.
The audits get blank checks. You give an audit, you have an exam. They literally get a blank check that says, if they say jump, you say how high, and you do whatever they need to do, blow up everything that you're doing to get them what they need on time. And it's a problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's a problem. So the thing is, like, we're being kind of whiny, right? Like, oh, this sucks. This is so hard, whatever. The reality is it is what it is, right? Like, these things exist for a reason. It's not just dysfunctional. It might be dysfunctional. It might not be. It might just be the way it is, because there's just no better way to do it. The reality is, all of this control and administrative environment, if you are an app manager or even a senior leader in technology, your ability to influence that ecosystem is very limited, right? Like if we think back like a senior director or a senior VP or something, and you start going after audit, it's not going to go well for you. Like you can't do that. You just have to it's just, you're going to look like you're just looking like you're hiding stuff, or just, it's not going to work. So you have to say, okay, take everything we just said, all the complaints, all the nonsense, all the whatever, and then just stuff it in a drawer because it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. You got to live in the reality you're in and say, okay, well, assuming all of that stuff is true, how do I, operate? Like, because I'm not just going to let myself and my team just get nickel and dime to death until everybody quits or burns out and is just like, jumping off the building. So like, what are the ways to get ahead of it? Right. And so like, this is a lot of why we built DevGrid, right? It's how do we help people get out from underneath this information deficit and request flood that comes in, that inevitably comes in from the top, right? Because these things are never, it's like something gets sent to the CIO, who gets sent to his guy, who gets sent to his guy. Like it all goes down in this weird chain. Maybe if you're lucky, it doesn't go directly to the boss. It goes to one person below and then down. And you're super reactionary because by the time you see it, it's been 2 weeks of it getting forwarded slowly through the chain. And now you have 2 hours to respond and then you're late. It's just crazy, right? So you have to get ahead of it. And we build a framework, right? Like this, we call it an NJOPS framework, right? Like we say there's 4 sections. There's 4 kind of pillars of that framework: inventory, insights, optimization, and governance. Those are sort of the 4 pillars of how you get a hold of these things, right? And so, like, I don't know which one of those, like you've heard me talk about this a bunch. I'm curious, like when we're solving this problem in particular, which do you think is the most important, or where would you start to try to tackle?
It's your inventory. 100% it's your inventory. Before you can make any decisions, you have to know what you have. And it's, when we're going through this with some clients, it's a lot bigger than a lot of people realize of your inventory. It's kind of we've been on these conversations. We start going through and talking through the approach. It's not even like a DevGrid approach to inventorying your portfolio. It's really just breaking it down into small units of things. It's an application. It has pieces, it has components, and it's just mind blowing to some of these individuals because they agree with us, but they've never really thought of it that way, and just how complex their environments are. Now, zooming up from a single application to a portfolio or a portfolio of portfolios, there's a significant amount of just pieces to that moving environment. They're living, breathing machine. You've got your apps, you've got your databases, your components, your buckets, now you put in the people on top of that, and it's a massive amount of work that you have to go in just to understand, like, what do I own? What do we own? What's in this environment? Without a clear and comprehensive inventory, I'm not talking about, like a high level inventory. You need that lower level of inventory of really having a clear picture of, what do I own? What am I responsible for? That's foundational to make any of the other pillars work. It just has to exist in a very, we don't have to have minute level details. We don't have to know, like, the smallest little units of those. It's certainly helpful, but without a clear inventory, you're wasting your time.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen, to your point about granularity, right? Like, it's one of those things where you can't go too crazy, although the more granular you are, usually the more helpful it is. Mm-hmm. But we've seen situations where what most people do in this context is they have some compliance stuff. They have some sort of framework. Everybody's got something. They've got ServiceNow. They've got something out there that gives them an app ID or something like that, right? Like that's usually the most common, or an asset ID. Sometimes people use that. And that's like maybe it's a billing ID. Maybe it's for like all kinds of things. So almost everybody has something. Although we've had some customers that didn't have anything, and we became that for them, which was cool because we got to help them kind of work through that. But most of our customers come to us with something, but they're very broad, right? Like they've got probably 50 to 100 different APIs and applications inside of one application. And they've just done that because it just makes their job easier. They don't have to do as much paperwork. They throw this one app ID on everything. And then in that case, it's much less valuable. You've basically created a portfolio of an application, and that's brutal. And we've gone through in our processes, we've gone through a couple of different times of, okay, we need to break this up. And then sometimes we're just like, it's not worth it. Like you guys, they can't wrap their heads around breaking it up. And so we just roll with it. But I agree. I mean, you have to get the inventory right. And like I said, the more granular, the better, because then what happens is, and this is something that we didn't really, I don't think, expect when we started building DevGrid, but it kind of turns into like a social graph, like what Facebook was, right? In the first, like it's amazing how interconnected everything is. And then once you start sort of navigating through that or starting to pull insights out of that, how those things start to become self-evident just by their relationships to each other. I mean, I don't know what your experience with that was, but for me, like that graph was really cool.
Yeah, it is. And, it's interesting. Actually, what I found interesting is how the technical decisions have been made as part of the overhead of managing, to your definition there, a portfolio that should be broken down into applications. A lot of teams I've seen that now they share resources between these applications because, well, it's just one application, so I can share resources. But now they have, by virtue of trying to simplify their inventory footprint, they have made their technical implementation significantly more complex and more difficult to manage, more difficult to upgrade, because now you've got a database that's shared between 4 different applications, and you do one upgrade and you're affecting 4 different things. And it's just that domino effect of upgrades and upgrades. And then you can never upgrade because it takes too much time to do. And so
it's like a derivative. It's like a derivative of Conway's law, right? Like
right.
The admin burden influences architecture.
Right.
Which is crazy.
And that's the wrong way of doing it, but I can see why that would be done that way. But typically you wouldn't share resources like that, but hey, it's just one app, so I can. And now you've got this gigantic monolithic application that, you just can't effectively manage anymore. It's just too complicated.
Yeah. So let's say somebody's got this problem and they're like, okay, hey, I've got a good inventory. I feel good about it, right? Like I can see everything. How, but that doesn't help me, right? Like it might help a little bit because I can go look stuff up faster, but like, how do I really start to progress? Like what are some of the insights that one could expect to pull once you have a good inventory?
Well, what we've kind of seen is there's a lot of demand for knowing where vulnerabilities are and what teams that roll up to and what components are vulnerable, what repos, because a lot of that isn't available in some of the reports that are given. It's just, hey, here's a spreadsheet of, I think this is the repo that it's in, but it's showing under this app ID. And so here, go figure it out. And, well, how do I know I'm done? Like, can you retest? No, just wait for the next spreadsheet to come out. And so I think that's one of the biggest value points that we have is
true.
We're going to have this information right away, and we can tell you exactly what's vulnerable. I mean, we can, if the inventory is a little bit off, you'll have 80% of the information. But I think that's been the most eye-opening thing for the customers that I've seen is that, oh, okay, well this is much better than I have today because I don't even own that other tool. I can't even log into it.
Yeah.
I just had the spreadsheet that I get emailed once a month, and by then it's just too late.
And again, it's a top of the house ID, right? Like you don't know what's going on.
Right.
It's maybe it's an ID, maybe it's a BU, maybe it's an app, maybe whatever. Whereas what we try to do, so the vulnerability thing's a great call out. It's been one of our more successful pieces. We got great partners there that we're actually going to do some PR on soon, which is cool. But most of these companies have got a ton of security tools, right? Like anywhere from, I think one of our customers has 7, another has like 17, 19, something like that. And to your point, like they're all over the place. They send some spreadsheet, maybe they aggregate them a little bit. It's like they've got some analyst crunching numbers and they don't have a good centralized way to do it. Some of them dump it in a VITS database or something like that. But again, what we try to do is we try to get the data from the source, right? So we partner with the actual security teams, security companies, pull it directly from them. And then to your point, go as low as possible. We don't come and say, here's all the BU level vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. We try to put it on the component or the repo at the lowest level. So then a team can see their stuff, right? And in an updated fashion, not they get some spreadsheet, which gets sliced up, which gets sliced up, which gets sliced up. And then finally they get to see their stuff. It's no.
It's not even like they don't get to see it right away.
Day.
It gets sent to the app manager, and the app manager has to now figure out which apps they have that they own on that list. And they have to part it out to the individual teams and get the work done that way. It's
bananas. Like I used to, if I ever went back into corporate life, there's a job I would kind of love to do, which is just is a overhead calculator, essentially, where you just go through and say, okay, cool, you've just created this process. Like I stopped a process in its tracks in my last job because it was something to do. It was actually very related to all this. Somebody wanted to throw a manual verification of PII not existing after every CR. Do you remember?
I remember that. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so like after every change to production, there was going to need to be evidence that, somebody had checked the logs and there was no PII. Never mind that wasn't a very practical, actual technical solution. It wasn't actually going to provide any real business value other than evidence that lets us check a box on a process, which has value of its own, but it wasn't actually making us safer because that's not a good, valid test. But let's say you are going to make a good faith effort after every production deploy. So you figure it's going to be about an hour's worth of work for someone to really dig in and do that on every. I was like, cool. So I just back the envelope math in the meeting with like a bunch of CIOs and this guy from security. And I'm like, just so you know, that's a $5 million a year ask. So like, if that's what you guys want to do, that's fine. But let's all co-sign that. The whole thing died because they're like, nobody had actually thought that through to say, oh, we're going to add 15, 30, 45 minutes to an hour of time to every production change. Oh, wait, we have tens of thousands of, whatever it was, whatever the number is and what that adds up to in terms of billable. Like, oh my God, that's incredibly expensive. We shouldn't do that. I just want to I wish everybody had to do that, right? Like, hey, we're going to put a process in place. Here's the estimated time. Like we used to go through this and I had a really good relationship with my last CISO. She's an awesome lady. And we used to talk about that for her space because she would roll out, some new scanner, right? Whatever, container scanning or whatever it was. They would roll out some new scanning technique because they needed to, right? Because it was a gap. Maybe the feds were after us about it. Whatever the reason was, it was a legitimate thing to do. And so but I used to always give her a little bit of grief because it's like, well, when you go and cost out the cost of rolling out this platform, you're looking at the vendor costs and maybe the implementation costs, right? But you're not costing the compliance cost, right? So you might spend $500,000, $2 million on the tool and getting it set up, but you've just created $10 to $15 million worth of work that now has to be done because now you've got scanners saying these things exist, right? And and to be fair, you're not
adding in that $10 to $15 million on top of it. You're not getting more money to do that. It's not additional overhead. It's $10 to $15 million of work that you're not getting done. So it's net zero. Well, you've just taken out $10 to $15 million of available work that just isn't going to get done anymore. So now you've got all this overhead for diminishing returns on your actual features for your customers.
Yeah. Well, and the challenge is, and this was her challenge, right? Like, if you bring that up, for one, it takes incredible forethought to bring that up, and you don't really know how bad your footprint, like, for example, turning on container scanning, is that going to cause a lot of issues or not really? Like, how clean are you? Like, you don't really know till you turn it on. And so there's a lot of unknowns there, but also, if you say, hey, we've got this initiative and it's $2 million and we're good, or we've got this initiative and it's 2 million of direct cost and anywhere from 5 to 20 million of indirect cost, like, you might kill your initiative, right? Like, and so it's, nobody. And so what ends up happening is you essentially sign the company up for it indirectly. And that happens over and over and over. And again, the container scanning thing is probably like, I'm not criticizing that, right? Like that was the right thing for them to do.
Oh, we do it. We have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so, but at the same time, like, that's the pattern of what happens, right? Like, all this stuff stacked. This is the administrative state. This is the administrative tax, is all of this indirect, we have to do it stuff And how do you get ahead of that? Well, you get ahead of it through automating the problem away, right? And this is what we're talking about. So you have the insights, you look into what's going on. You know, when we talk about the optimization pillar, the way I think about that one is, and we've both run SRE teams. And to me, without going too deep on SRE, the fundamental innovation of SRE in my mind is a mentality and a practice that says we are going to remove toil through code, right? And they're explicitly talking about the toil of production operations effectively, right? Like, so whether it's, you know, shift left on security or automated, you know, rolling restarts, alarms, all that type of stuff. They're basically saying, hey, if something's driving you crazy, write code to make that problem go away. Well, I think one of the things that we're trying to say is actually production's not as hard as it used to be. I mean, people still have trouble. Obviously, it's not like it's that things don't happen. Production isn't as hard as it was in 2010, right? Like you've got the tools, things are a lot better, but this administrative tax is a good place to invest. Right. Like if you were to come in this, I think this is a lot of how we think about DevGrid. DevGrid's like an SRE platform for the administrative tax. Right. And it's like, okay, how do we take these problems and make them observable and then automate the response. Right. And so that's kind of the other piece. And then which dovetails right into the governance piece. Right. And I mean, I think that's the most important piece because if you can't keep, I mean, maybe inventory and governance are sort of the anchors. Right. Because if you can't keep track of, if you can't have a way to say this is what good means, then none of it really matters. Right.
Where are you measuring your journey? Right. It's here's where I want to be in here's my North Star and what is my journey to get there? How do we measure where we should be based off of the definition of good? But you know, your definition of good is typically vague. It's typically blurry. It's typically messy, and there's not a good way to know or measure what does good look like because it can change, it can evolve, but also it's very hard to measure unless you really get into the details.
Well, and I think that's the piece, right? Like, I mean, we spent time, you know, we rolled out maturity journeys, which was like a near and dear thing for us as part of the platform. And, you know, some people took to it right away, but some people like, we've really had to they love it. And then they look at it and they kind of stare at it like, well, so what should we put? Like, how do we, you know, like it's actually really hard. There's this block in technology. I think we've talked about it before, like compared it to sales, right? There's this, how do we, like there's been this resistance to measuring ourselves as technologists that has now like that whole generation of leaders don't actually know how to think about it, right? Like they, you know, and so we try to help. I mean, it's not, but you know, we don't have all the answers either,
but what's great is that once you start to tease in some of these journeys and you start to give some little hints of what to measure, you know, just the blossoming of thoughts, it just starts to, you know, just roll out of people.
It does start to come out. Yeah.
It just pours out. You just got to pop the plug and it just starts to come out. And I think we had just the conversation of holy expletive. I've never seen anything like this, but I can see how this is going to change us. It was, you know, that was a really great moment to hear from somebody. It's like, yeah, you're right. It is, but you got to measure it first. You got to come up with the ideas first.
Yeah. You got to say, okay, hey, you know, and it, like one of the basic things we do back to the vulnerabilities, right, is, you know, you can set up a journey that looks at your security maturity, right? Like, hey, what do you have any open criticals? If you have open criticals, you lose points right away, right? Or you don't gain points. You know, you look at your aging. Are you staying within your SLAs? Are you not? Right? Like all that type of stuff. And the cool thing about the way that we do it is in the maturity journeys, you know, it's not a scorecarding system per se, right? Like it obviously does do similar things, but it's all about the progression, right? So we keep your score for that application. We keep the results. It's like, you know, my kid does her times tables every day. And, you know, they get graded and it's like, you have a record of how she did on that day. Right. And it's kind of the same thing with the apps. Like we know what the test is going to be. It's the same test every day. And then here's the results. You got this thing right. You got this thing partially right. You got this thing wrong, you know, and then it simplifies the feedback we're getting, right? Like, 'cause it simplifies management at every level, right? So like if you're at an app manager level and you've got maybe 1 to 5 applications, maybe 10, right? Okay, cool. Anything pops, your score on those apps will go down a little bit overnight. Like, okay, cool. What happened? I can go look and see, click into my thing, and then, oh, well, this app just went down. Okay, well, what happened? Oh, we found a new critical. Great, I'm on it. Right? We just did that. That's an immediate piece of feedback as opposed to waiting for the spreadsheet or whatever.
Or you're waiting for the team's message on Teams to say, hey, you've got this critical, and you have to have somebody that's dispatching those and managing those. But this is right away. It's like, I get this right now.
And it's not disruptive because you're doing it proactively in a time when you're in the right space for it. You're looking for what are the fires I want to get ahead of and all those sort of types of things. And then that also rolls up too, right? So if you can have, so you have your app manager, then maybe a senior app manager, then maybe a CIO, they can all do the same thing, right? So they can all, now, which maybe it can be annoying, right? If the CIO is looking at individual things and is pinging those people, but at least they can do that and they don't have to wait for an email, right? If they're the kind of person that's going to do that anyways, then it's better they do it sooner than later, right? And so it's been a cool thing, but I don't know. I think it's a journey, right? Like it's not, this administrative, if I was to kind of sum up and I want to leave it to you for the last word, but like if I was going to sum up my perspective is like, hey, these things are, this administrative tax is real. It's a drag, but it's just like any other problem. You can solve it. You just have to get ahead of it and be thoughtful, and software is a great way to do it. And either, you could build your own stuff. You can work with a partner like us. Like there's different ways to do that, but, don't let it just burn you out, right? Like go through and then make incremental progress. It's like, again, back to SRE. It's just, what's the worst thing you're dealing with? Can we solve that with code? Yes. Okay. What's the next worst thing you're dealing with? And just keep doing that until you're pretty smooth.
Yeah. I've noticed that there's a lot of smart people at these places, and they honestly and truly want to get their work done. They want to get great work done. They want to move the needle. They want to go forward. There's such a drive that people see an opportunity that they can make the place around them better. They can make their teams better. They can get their work done in a more efficient way. But when you have these taxes on them, it's a permanent chip away at their motivation to get things done, because it's training the individuals that no matter how much you want to get some things done, you will have limitations to your drive and ambition, and you will always be limited on how fast you can go through these things. And it just erodes that individual's just motivation to keep pushing the needle forward. So now you have a trained slowdown, because, well, I'm not going to be too ambitious because there's going to be a tax and this is going to be a burden. And if even no matter what I do, I won't be able to get this done. So why would I bother? Now, I'm not saying that's a great attitude. By all means, I'm not saying that, but it is a real mentality that happens over years of this tax, this spin that happens with these processes that just are a heavy burden. It's just, you can put a rock in a bag and put it on your backpack, and one rock isn't that bad, but then over time you've got 4 bricks in your backpack, and that's a heavy weight to carry on every single feature. And it's something that's felt across teams, and it rolls up to everybody in an organization.
Absolutely. It's good. It's a good call. All right. So what can people do about it? Write some code. Always makes things better. If you are interested and you want to talk to us, you want to learn more about NJOPS and how we sort of do that, check out devgrid.io or hit us up at hello@devgrid.io and, social media, et cetera. Give us a follow on the podcast. And, we appreciate you guys sticking around, dealing with us. Jason, thank you for the time, buddy. And we'll talk again soon.
See ya.